Let's start. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this second webinar on the ERM. We had a webinar yesterday for the APRO region, and as per my estimate, it should not take more than 40-45 minutes, so we'll try to finish within that time. Before I start, bit of logistics. If you could keep your microphone muted and also video, maybe you can also cut off the video. That would be great. You can ask question in the chat window, and I'll answer them maybe at the end of the session. At the outset, I would like to mention that I will only cover the changes, what has changed between the last year and this year. I won't discuss those things which are already discussed in the last session, and there's no change in that. So with that, in terms of what I plan to cover, we plan to cover these six issues. I'm sure you might have seen the email which I had sent yesterday evening, where we gave links to a lot of learning material and videos and YouTube videos. So therefore, this session is primarily to give you an overview. I will not be going into the details of each navigation because they are very well explained in those simulation videos which we have produced. So I will give you a link. I will show you the video maybe for 10 seconds, and then you can watch them on your own later. So let me start with the first issue, the governance arrangement. As I mentioned, I'll only cover the those things which are different. So this year, under governance, what is different is a new role called regional approval role. The other 5 roles were there before during the risk response stage. We have added a new role called regional approval role, and that's what we'll talk about when we come to that session. Regional approval role is a person who will validating the assessment of the country office. So first, let me focus on the key changes which we have made in this year assessment, also called this year's cycle. Why I'm calling cycle and why not assessment, I'll talk a little later in the next slide. Okay, for this whole key changes and introduction to this webinar, we have a video which I would like to show you only for maybe 10 seconds, and then we can move to the next. So this is a video.
Hello. For 2018 ERM cycle,
all the key changes.
We are bringing a series of videos to familiarize you with the new application, the changes what we have made in the new application compared to 15, 16, and 16, 17, and also in terms of concepts, what has.
Okay, that's it. So this video's link I've already sent you. So you can watch these videos as per your convenience. The one advantage of watching them on YouTube is that you can also see the subtitling. In one of the video which I'll talk a little later, we have I have the subtitle in English, and especially for my office colleagues from the Latin American region, they can always use the subtitling to watch in Spanish. So in terms of key changes, I'll quickly walk you through the changes because these changes are also explained in the video which I just talked about. The first change, of course, which you know that we have changed the cycle. The cycle is now Jan to December, whereas in the previous assessment, which is 15, 16, and 16, 17, our cycle was middle of year from July to June. This is one big change we have made. That's why we are calling assessment for 2018 as 2018 assessment and not 18-19 assessment. Another change which we have made this time is that we have got a new category called wrongdoing. In the past, we have two areas, strategic risk area and fraud risk area. And now we have added another category called wrongdoing. And in this category, with the wrongdoing category, we have also added two new risk factors. So these risk factors are primarily for the to capture the risks related to the PSEA. As you know, PSEA is a big issue now in UN system, and in the global meeting, we had announced this that in the upcoming ERM assessment, we will include two factors on the PSEA. I'll talk about them in little later. The other big change we have made is the way we manage the additional risk. In the previous assessments, the additional risks were managed in a form of a justification, in the form of a text box, where you will enter the risk, but you cannot do anything else with the risk, in the sense that you cannot assign focal point, you cannot do the rating of the risk. So this year we have changed that system, and we'll talk about this in next slides, where we'll show you how to request an additional risk. And once you request additional risk and it comes to the ERM administrator, then the administrator will be able to assign that risk only for your country. And you can do everything what you can do with any other risk factor, even for that risk factor, but that risk factor is only for your department, not globally. This way you can assign a focal point, you can give a rating, and everything you can do with the additional local risk, which was not possible in the previous versions. Okay, we brought the concept of causes, potential impact, and probability in the last ERM assessment. But there was nothing in the application per se which you can enter. So this year in the new application, we have added three more field in the application where you have to select the causes which is causing that risk to happen. You have to select the potential impact of that risk, and you have to also select what is the probability of happening that risk. With these three things, these three additional things, entering into system, what you will not have to do, you will not have to assign any risk rating for the risk, because risk rating will be assigned automatically by the system. If you recall, in the last year also we introduced the concept of a matrix, where depending upon the what probability and what impact you have, you come out into the four category of low risk, medium risk, high risk, and critical risk. The matrix remains the same, but the matrix calculation is done behind the application itself, where based on what potential impact and what probability you select, system will assign a risk rating for the risk factor. But having said that, we also had a option last year which was called NA option, means some risk may not be applicable to your department. So that option is still available, which means if you select probability as 0 and impact as 0, it means that risk is not applicable to your department. Okay, the other change which we have made based on the UNBOA recommendation, that in our previous version, there was no option of adding focal points for fraud risks. We had focal point for the strategic risk, but we didn't have any focal point for the fraud risk. So that we have added this year. So you will also have to, when you do the fraud risk assessment, you also have to add the name of the focal point. That is for fraud risk and also for the wrongdoing category. As I mentioned in the beginning of the slide on the governance arrangement, that we have got a new role called regional approver. So that role is within the system itself. It means that this time you will also have, when you submit the assessment for validation, it will go to the regional approver. But before that, the other point which I want to convey, that in the last year when Board of Auditor visited some of the regional office, the regional office felt that when they do the validation of any risk assessment, they do not have enough documentation to review before they decide, or before they give their opinion whether this risk assessment is done correctly or it can be improved. So therefore, starting this year, we have made a mandatory mandatory requirement to upload a supporting documentation when you submit the risk assessment for the validation. This is primarily for each department. Um, and then after that, when you upload the supporting documentation, then when the regional approver will go into the system, they can download, they can view what you have done. Now, what to upload? For that, we are giving you a blank template in which you have to fill some information, and I'll talk about the template later in the webinar. Of course, when we have added the regional approver, we have also added a notification. It means whenever you submit your risk assessment for validation by the regional office, automatically a notification will be sent by the system from you to the regional approver saying that so and so person has submitted risk assessment for validation. And of course, the regional approver will do the validation right in the system. In the past 2 years, there was no online approval or validation by the regional approvers. What used to happen, that a country office will send a file, which is called PDF file, which you can export from the application. They will send to regional office by email. Regional office will review and then they give their go ahead, okay, or they will suggest some changes, and then country office will make changes, or then they validate the assessment. Assessment used to be validated by the country office, but in two steps. First step was sending file, and second step was approving in the system. That is now changed. So once you submit assessment, approval will be done by the regional office. I think that's what happens in the SIS My Results as well. Well, there's one good news. The good news is that there is no need of making any action plan in this new 2018 risk assessment way. And why we don't have to make action plan? Because the risk assessment and risk response is launched together. Together means, like last year we had assessment first and then we launched response much later. But now both are launched together, which means that the moment you finish your risk assessment and when you get it validated by the regional approver, you can immediately start responding to the risk which you have identified high or critical. So, and like we did in the last year risk response stage, when you start responding to the risk, the first thing you do, you make the action plan. And another good feature which we have added in the application, we call it facility to undertake differentiated risk assessment. And this is also very much related with the feature I explained before regarding the additional risk. Which means, I mean, there was 2 or 3 audit recommendation from our internal audit office that you cannot have same risk assessment for every department or every country office because they operate in different contexts. There are some countries which are operating under humanitarian conditions, some are under fragile context. We should have a customized so-called risk assessment for those departments which are operating in a different environment, number one. Number two, there could be a situation where some department or some country office have received suddenly some big grant or they have mobilized resources, and now they have to undertake a new risk assessment because now the situation has changed. So they might have to add some new local risk factor to ensure they mitigate them. And most of donors nowadays ask for those kind of those kind of requirements. So this differentiated risk assessment means we can put additional risk factor for those countries which operate in different environment, which primarily means we can have customized risk assessment for different countries. In fact, we are in touch with the HFCB branch, and also with the help of DMS, we are going to get list of 25 to 30 countries who are in different environment, and we will undertake a separate webinar with those country offices, and we will probably facilitate the risk assessment process for those country office, and that information will send it later. And of course, there is a improved PDF file in the new application. So this kind of brings us at the this talks about the changes which we had done. So now let me quickly move to the guidance note, which we had shown last year also. But let me show you the changes. I'm now going to the guidance note. So this guidance note is, I mean, these documents are already available in the Google folder, which I talked about in the email. When we talk of the guidance note, I think there are a few important points which you should remember for this year assessment. Number one, we emphasized this last year also, that when we do risk assessment, you should focus only on your own department. You should not think of that risk as a global risk, because every department will undertake the risk assessment. So you must make sure that your risk assessment should be applicable to your own department, and you should not respond on behalf of the unit. I already spoke about two additional risk factors which we have added this year, and then the new feature of selection of potential causes and the management of additional risk, which I just explained, which facilitate or which enable us to do the customized assessment for different countries. Now here I will, this is the slide which we had last year also, but what I will focus only on those things which have changed this year. Uh, Here under the, this is a flow, basically how we do the assessment and validation, a process flow. In the last year, we used to do the rating. We used to define what rating we have, but this time we don't have to define rating. We only define the impact and the probability and add justification. And that's the only change for the strategic risk assessment. And for the fraud risk assessment and wrongdoing assessment, the only change is that we have to select or identify the focal point as well, which was not there last year. Now, the next few slides are same like last year. We have given example of one example of risk of non-delivery of program results, under which there are three risk factor and there are different causes of each risk factor. I'm not going to detail because this is already we explained in detail in the last year assessment. And then here comes the an example of doing the strategic risk assessment. This example was there last year. We just modified in terms of steps changing. And the modification again is here. First of all, you have to select the potential causes, which was not there last year. You assess the risk impact rating. You assess the probability of risk event occurrence. And then you enter a justification for the rating. And then, of course, you assign the risk focal point. I won't go into detail of these slides because these are self-explanatory. But as I mentioned before, if you want to select a non-applicable, not applicable risk, you have to select 0 for probability and 0 for the impact. And this flow chart gives you in detail how do you do the assessment. First, see the applicability, then do the review the relevant data, decide the impact, then decide, and the different type of impact. There could be impact on financial impact, operational impact, and reputational impact. And on that basis, we have given some guideline which we haven't changed since last year in terms of what impact will be insignificant or rating 1, and what impact will be catastrophic or rating 5. And these are some of the example or kind of food for thought they have given for different type of impact, for financial, for operational, and for reputational impact. So this was kind of guide for you on how to decide the impact, and this is then after you decide the impact, then you go and decide the probability of that risk happening. Same way, there are some tips, some example on what basis you say this probability is five, and on what basis you say this probability is one. One means extremely unlikely, and five means very likely this event may happen. And again, this is the bit of description, extremely unlikely to very likely. And then after you first decide the impact, then you decide the probability, then you come to justification. On the justification, as I mentioned, you have to decide justification on what basis you are giving this rating to this probability, to this risk factor. You have to write some brief information in the justification box, and you can write detail in your template, which I talked about before. This is the matrix I was talking about. That this matrix in the past last year we had shown this matrix, and we requested each country office to decide what impact or what probability it has based on the based on this matrix. You define the risk rating, which is critical, high, medium, and low. But this time you don't have to do this. System will do on your behalf based on what rating you give to the probability and the impact. And then, as I said, risk rating is automated. And then once you get the risk rating, then you identify a risk focal point. This is the complete process for undertaking a strategic risk. Then this is the fraud risk assessment, and I've added those new factors. And this is a process which you undertake, which you follow for doing the fraud risk assessment. For fraud risk assessment, we haven't added there's no feature of impact and probability, but for fraud, the concept which we use is the inherent risk, control effectiveness, and the residual risk. The justification you have that what kind of controls you already have in place. Here, I would like to add one upcoming feature, which we are going to add probably next year, is that you may be familiar that each department will have to normally do what we call control self-assessment, which is normally initiated by the TMS, Quality Management Unit. They request you to do the control self-assessment with a lot of questions, and then they ask you few for different category. They ask you question: is controls are working? Controls are not working. So that control assessment in the next version we will be linking with the control effectiveness in the ERM, so that when you decide when you claim or when you make a statement that the risk that this for this inherent risk you have enough control already in the office, then you have to probably reflect on those controls, what controls you have, and that controls is almost linked with the control surface assessment which we are doing. So there is a request by auditors and by the different stakeholder that we should merge both the things, because every country office has to do two things. They do control surface assessment and they do the ERM. So ERM part will be linked with the CSA probably from the next year version. We will be working on. These are different steps which were same like last year. The only new step which we have added is the entry of the focal point, which is a new step. And then the same way you first select the risk event, then you decide the inherent rating of the event, then you decide the review the data, and you see what controls you already what control you already have in the office for to make sure that this risk is though this risk is inherent risk is high, but it is not high when it comes to residual risk. And then you controls are only two category, either controls are active or controls are ineffective. So based on what rating you give on your controls which are available, it automate then you can decide the residual risk of that particular fraud and wrongdoing risk. This is the same flow. We decide on the residual risk and then we enter the residual risk in the application. And then of course we write in justification box again talk for the same thing, what kind of controls you have in place. And there, as you mentioned before, it is always good to list if there are some frauds which have happened in your office, or if there are some past cases, or if there are something which is identified in the in the in the in the past reports, some control weaknesses. So you have to take into account all those issues before you decide that my residual risk is low, because we will be undertaking some sample quality review of all the assessment after the validation is done, and then we'll come back to you if we feel that in some country, and especially those country which operates under HFCB context, that the risk assessment has to be revisited, because quality is a concern of the auditors and the board of auditors. They have repeatedly mentioned, and even our internal audit branch have repeatedly mentioned that though we are improving in the quality, but still it is not best quality. In terms of improving, I would only like to say one thing, that when we started in 2015, the risk assessment, it was very, very basic, very simple. We just click the button that risk is high, medium, low, or critical. We didn't ask any question in the first assessment. But as and when in the next year, we added the justification box, we introduced the concept of causes, we introduced the concept of probability impact, we introduced the concept in principally, but we didn't have anything in the application. So this year, we have added those things. Slowly, we are bringing more and more details when you undertake assessment, and that's the only way the quality of the assessment will improve. But at the end of the day, we all know risk assessment is subjective, but we are trying to bring as much quantification as possible so that it is close to the real situation. Then, of course, then you identify the focal point, and then focal point you just put in the system. These are the steps for the fraud risk assessment. This complete the kind of guidance note, and then now I will move back to the previous slide on the ERM. Okay. We discussed the changes, we discussed the guidance note on how to undertake the assessment, and then we have a video in terms of how to assess the risk and how to do the navigation. I won't show that video in detail, but I'll just give you the flavor of the video. Again. Okay, before that, I'm to show you the other video, which is the, okay, here it is.
Welcome again to this second video on the how to conduct risk assessment. I hope
this is
you
about
have
8
seen
minutes,
my previous video,
8 minutes
which
video.
was primarily on the.
Yeah, this is about 8 minutes video, and it talks about the whole process of the risk, how to access the risk, my risk, and then how to do all the navigation. As you see, and this is simulation in terms of the screen capturing. It will show you what to check, what not to check. It will show you how to see where the training material is. It will show you how to do the assessment, the last year score, impact, probability. You can watch this video on your own convenience, and you can see how to do the assessment. There's nothing rocket science, very simple. Everything is self-explanatory. Talks about both of the strategic risk as well as of the fraud risk. I won't show the video here. I thought I'll just share with you. Now we are back to the main PowerPoint. So this way you can go and have a look at the my risk assessment and how to enter the assessment. One thing which I did not mention so far, which you should be, which you will see another change this year when you do the assessment for your own convenience. It will also show one column which will talk about what was your last assessment. Not last assessment, which was initial assessment, but last assessment which was after undertaking the mitigation. So this gives you This gives you kind of some support that if my last assessment was high and I have taken some action, whether those actions are still applicable, if I have set up a new system, if those systems are still working. So this will give you that access in that sense. Then I already talked about additional local risk management. And for this also, we have a video. This is the shortest video. It's about 1 minute and 48 seconds. This only talks about how to request for an additional risk. Um, I mean, I won't go into the video. You can, all the links are already available in the email which I sent, and also links are also in this presentation. Then this is the most important element which I want to spend at least 5-10 minutes on the issue of what changes have happened in the submission and validation. And this video is also very detailed. Now, what happens in this process? I will show the video maybe at the end a little bit to give you flavor. First of all, before we discuss the submission and validation process, one thing which we have to talk about is the roles. If you may recall, we had a lot of roles for in the risk response stage, the RTWG, the risk committee member, and many other people, but we never had any role in the risk assessment stage, because risk assessment stage, as I mentioned, everything was done by the country office. Nobody was doing anything else, because even the approval was done offline. This year we have added that category of regional approval. So who can do what? This table depicts that. Departmental focal point can enter the risk in the system, same as departmental approver also can enter the risk. But departmental focal point cannot submit for validation, because if when risk assessment is submitted for validation of the regional approver, only head of the office or department approver can submit that. When I say department approver, and I'm not using along with the head of the office, because head of office can assign anybody as approver, and that person, when they log in into the system with their own login ID, they will have the access to submit for validation. Then regional approver can only do one step in the risk assessment. They cannot enter any data in the risk. They cannot even submit for validation. They can only review. Once they review, they can either reject, or we call it request for revision, or they can validate. Actually, the SIS, my risk application, and also my result application, we have a control inbuilt, which means that the person who is a approver cannot be a regional approver. These two roles conflict with each other. In fact, if you want to assign anybody regional approver, then you have to take off the approval roles from that. So with this brief background about the role, this a very detailed step-by-step process we have explained on how to submit for validation. I won't go into detail about each step because they are self-explanatory, but I only want to talk about first step, which at times might cause you some frustration, because it caused me frustration when I was doing the testing of the application. What happens, as I told you, we have added three new features this time. Three new entry in the application. One is the entry of the causes. Second is the entry of the potential impact, and third is the entry of probability. And then you have to assign a focal point. Now, what happens unless until all the causes, all the potential impact, and all the probability and all the focal points have been entered, system will not allow you to submit for validation. So what happens, I will talk a little later. When you start the assessment, the right hand side bar will only show you assessment not complete. So unless until assessment is not complete, submit for validation button will not even appear. It will only appear when assessment is complete. So that's why sometime when you do the assessment, you might feel you have done everything, but you have to closely watch if even one risk factor out of 36 risk factor, you have not chosen the causes or you have not entered the focal point. or for the strategic risk, we're not given the impact and probability rating system. The assessment complete will not come in the menu, and if that doesn't come, you can't even submit for the validation. So first of all, and secondly, as I mentioned in my last slide, only only the department approver can submit for validation, and focal point cannot submit. So if focal point is trying to say that, oh, I don't get the button, you have to have approval role to submit for validation. What focal point will see that assessment is complete. So it means the role is, we have done all the entry, but now for submission, it has to be given that the approver will have to come into the system and submit for validation. And when they submit for validation, they have to upload the supporting documentation they just mentioned before in terms of adding that template. And they have to also take one statement which says that the assessment is done together with the country office staff. So when both the things are done, I mean, the approver has uploaded the document and tick mark the statement, then again a submit for validation button will appear in the box. And once they click that button, then the system status or the assessment status will move from draft stage to pending validation. Once it moved to pending validation stage, it means nothing more is to be done by the country office unless until they hear from the regional approver their decision. So after that, the regional approver will go into the system. When regional approver will go into the system, they will have two options. Either they can reject the, first of all, the approver will go into system and they will download the file which you have attached in the previous stage, and then they can review the file, they can make the comments, they can talk to you, they can email you, and once, if they think that this assessment needs a bit of more work, then they can request for revision. They will they will click a button, request for revision, which means the assessment will come back to the draft stage where, though assessment is complete, but you can still go and make some changes either in the probability or in the impact so that risk rating get changed. So once you have done the changes, you again submit for validation following the same step which I explained before, and then it again goes to the approver, and then they can review again, and then they can decide whether to confirm. So once the approver is happy with the validation, happy with the assessment, they will click the confirm validation button. And then when they click confirm validation button, they will get one extra box, reconfirm, they reconfirm, and that's it. And once the regional office confirm the validation, the whole process, so to say, is complete. After that, country office has nothing to do with this. Then what they can do, as I mentioned before, risk assessment and risk response is together. The country office can immediately start responding to the high end. Now, next few slides are just for you. What I explained in the steps, here it shows how the screen will look like. Assessment not complete means they're still in draft stage. Once your assessment is complete, you get assessment complete and submit for validation. And then once you click these two options, you choose the file and you click this button, then system will go to pending validation. And once basically submit and the system is pending validation, and also a download document button will appear, means that document which you have just uploaded, you can review this. And once now, and then if after the pending validation appear, then focal point will only see export to PDF and export to Excel and pending validation. They can't see any other menu item. And after that, this is the screen which approver will see. Once approver will enter into the system, they will see confirm validation and return for revision. And then they can either return, or if they want to confirm, they click the button here and then the confirm validation, it gets validated. This is kind of last step for the risk assessment stage. Now, before I go to the training material, I want to quickly show you one small feature, which is not a feature of the ERM, but feature of YouTube and how you can take advantage. Okay, let me put this sound off. This is separate video for the risk for the submission and validation process. In this particular video, what I have done the English subtitling. So if you press CC, you will get all the subtitling in English. Now, what you can do here actually is that you can change the subtitling into any other language. This is not my feature, this is feature of the YouTube. So if I go here and if I right now it's English. The only thing I want to remind you here that don't choose auto English. Auto English is the subtitling which is done automatically. Choose the English because that is something which I have entered inside. I've uploaded the text along with the video. So when you go to English and then you go to auto translate, see here, I was telling you there are two features. One is English auto-generated, one is English. This English is our own text. Then you go to auto translate, and if you want to pick up different language, once you pick up Spanish, and then the subtitling change. I hope this will be helpful for those country offices because we have different language. We have French, Spanish, and Arabic. I mean, you can change to any 189 languages which Google supports. That's why I thought it's important that if you really want to see in your own language this particular YouTube video, you can change the language, but make sure you select English to language because if the auto translator has done wrong translation, then the further if auto translation has done wrong English translation, then it will further deteriorate the translation. But if you use English, which is already entered by me, then it will be close to the real. Still, it won't be still doing automatic translation from the English, but it will be probably close to real. This is the only thing which I thought I will share with you. You can change the language. This is primarily for the colleague from the Latin American region because I know they would like to see different presentations in Spanish. So you can of course watch them later. I think one more thing I want to add here that these videos are produced in-house. You see this Bandicam logo on the top. It's a free software with which we produce video. Of course, these are not professional video. These are simple, done in-house, in my room. See all the mess backside. I could not change the background. So please bear with the quality of the video. We have tried our best to make them as good as we can. But of course, they are not the best. Then I go back to the my presentation. Just two more slides, and then we're done. Now here, after this is a slide which talks about different training material and link. I've already sent this slide in a different form yesterday by email, which you must have seen. So so this is the different, and here also all the links. You can click any of the link and you can go to that particular area. If okay, let me also show you how it look like. This is the folder of the training material. Now in this folder, when you click from the system application, you come to this training material. What we have done, bit of changes. I have organized in three different subfolders, which is 16, 17, and 18. When you click 18, you have got 5 further subfolder. One is template, one is short videos, recorded webinar, guidance note, and fact. I just want to touch briefly about first a template. When you see template, this is a template of assessment item, and the template is very simple. We wanted to give you a better template, but there was no time. So what template we have given you? So this is the template which you have to fill. This template has only what we have done pre-populated the risk area and the revised risk item. And here in this area, you have to write those factors which you considered in determining the impact which you have entered in the application. As I mentioned, the purpose of this template is quote the regional approver in taking a decision or reviewing that if you have given particular impact rating or probability rating to one risk factor, what was the rationale behind? What factors you considered? So please list those factors here so that you can convey your thinking process to the approver, and also it becomes a record for the audit purposes. If auditor wants to know what was the reason why they did this rating and that rating, it's already recorded in the application, and then we don't have to get those recommendation of quality quality good or quality bad. Now let me go back to this slide on the training material. Uh, so under the ERM cycle, the short videos are basically those 4 videos which I talked about, but these are the video file. If you want to view them not through YouTube, but just yourself, you can download them into local machine and you can watch whenever you want. But if you want to enjoy the subtitling feature and other advantages which YouTube gives you, you can watch them on YouTube. You can watch on phone. You can watch while traveling anytime in the YouTube. Then this is the okay. Now last thing, recorded webinar. In the recorded webinar, we will upload all the recordings which we this webinar is being recorded. So this presentation will be recorded in the webinar. Those who could not join at this time, they can attend. They can look at the webinar later. Sorry, give me 1 second. My other computer reset. Okay, then under the fact, this is thing which I want to talk for just 30 seconds. Under the fact, we have a Google sheet called 2018 ERM assessment fact. When you open this sheet, you will see a sheet will open, and this sheet will come on time. Yes. So in this sheet, there are 2 columns. One is question, other side is answer. Though you are welcome to use the ISD integrated service desk to report a problem or anything you want to if you're facing the problem. But I personally request you to use this feature, because what is in this feature that anytime anybody enters anything in this sheet, I get a notification by email immediately that this sheet has been updated. I can go to the sheet and write the answer as early as possible. Number one. Number two, if you go to the sheet and you want to pose your question, all the previous questions are already there. So you can have a look at that. Whether your question is something which is already answered, you don't have to make any request a question, because all the questions, the answers will be on the right side. That's why I thought use this fact sheet to report any problem or report any inconvenience or some feature is not working in your machine. Please use the fact part. And now the last slide I have is on the these are the video links. The last slide I have on the 2 things. Number one, you in consultation with the regional office, you have to give us the name of the regional approval so that we can enter them in the system, so that when you submit for validation, the email will go to the regional approver, and only that person who is in the system will be able to approve your validation. This is the first thing which I will request after all the 3 webinars are over. And then, of course, the deadline for completion is 31st May 2000. So with that, I think I've come to this end of this webinar. Uh, my other computer where chat was running got reset. Let me see if I can. Okay, now if you have any question, you can put in the chat window. I will try to answer them, or you can always ask this question in that fact sheet which I just talked about. Give me a second. Okay. Okay, I'm looking at the chat window now. Well, I have not seen any questions so far. So, and if there are no question, I will probably close the session here and I will upload the recording of this webinar under the recorded webinars folder I had obtained. No question? Maybe it takes time to digest. Okay, so I think with that, I will close this webinar, webinar. I have one more tomorrow at 7 a.m. For ESRO, ICARO, and Patrick. If anybody has missed today's webinar from your region, you can always request them to join tomorrow in morning 7. Thank you so much and have a good day. Bye.